Welcome back, everybody, and in today's video we are going to be looking at another example of how to build a major scale. So we've actually previously looked at building major scales using sharps. So today we are going to talk about how to build scales using flats instead, and now we'll get an idea about why we need them. So let's go ahead and start with building an F major scale. I'm going to follow this exact format here. I'm going to write out the skeleton. I'm going to work strictly with whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So here I go, writing out the skeleton. F, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F. All right, so once again, no sharps, no flats, or anything like that. Now, let's go ahead and take a look. From F to G, is that a whole step or a half step? Turns out that that's a whole step. And all right, so now G to A, whole step or half step? That's also a whole step. A to B. Now, according to our little thing over here, according to our little method, point number 2, it says that A to B needs to be a half step. Well, there's two ways that I could make it a half step. One is that I could put a sharp on A, and it becomes a half step. But now my problem, we've kind of discovered this in a previous video, is now the distance that I have from G to A sharp is not a whole step. That is in fact a step and a half. And if I wanted to fix it, then I would have to put a sharp over here on G, and then I'd have to make, then this obviously would not be a whole step anymore, and this would be a step and a half from F to G, and so then I'd have to put a sharp here on F, and wait a minute, then it would be F sharp and not the F major scale. All right, so let's see. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix that, and instead we are going to put a flat on B. And this actually fixes our problem. And so now we have whole, whole, half. So far so good. And now let's consider from B flat to C, is that a whole step or a half step? And that is a whole step. From C to D, is that a whole step or a half step? That is a whole step. From D to E, is that a whole step or a half step? That's a whole step. And finally, from E to F is also a half step. So now we've properly built an F major scale. And so you can see the F major scale gets built with a B flat. So let's consider a couple of things. I want to consider what happens, like what if we were to use something else for the F major scale. And so let's look at another example. What if I, for example, wrote something like this, F, G, A? Well, wait a minute, isn't B flat the same thing as an A sharp? So couldn't I just do this? C, D, E, and F. And the answer is no, I absolutely cannot do that. There's a couple of reasons. The biggest reason, though, if you are a little bit more intuitive about maybe music stuff, and you know that, I don't want to get too far in depth with it, but if I had, I'll go ahead and draw out the treble clef here. We know that the clef is going to be 5 lines and 4 spaces. And so imagine this is treble clef. I'm not very good at drawing a treble clef here, but something like that. Okay, and so what would happen is if I needed an A, which would be that note, and if I needed an A sharp, how do I know which one I'm supposed to sharp and which one I don't? Well, then I end up with this issue where I have to put naturals on everything. So I'd have to go, well, this one needs a natural, and this one over here, this one on the left needs a sharp, and this one over here on the right, it needs a natural. And that just gets really confusing. An even worse scenario would be, what if I had, once again, my treble clef, 5 lines and 4 spaces. And what if I had a chord? What if I actually had the chord F, A, C, which is an F major, and for some reason, let's say that I wanted to have the 4th degree in there, maybe an add 11 chord or something like that. And if this doesn't quite make sense to you yet, that's perfectly okay. What I need to do is I have to put this, and in the key of F major, I would have some kind of indicator over here that would tell me that you flat the B's. And that would tell me that this note gets flatted, and it's really a B flat. Now, if I didn't have that, I couldn't simply write a chord, and this is a kind of a worse example than the one above it, and worse in the sense that it breaks the rule even more. I couldn't have an A or an A sharp. How do I write both of those at exactly the same time? Here, they're linear, and this is just sort of ugly to look at. It's like, oh goodness, I've got a sharp and I've got a natural, and if I want another one, I have to sharp it again, and it just becomes sort of a hassle. But here, it's more of, I literally can't write these two together unless they're on different lines. And so that's why over here they have to be different, what we would call like different pitch classes. This one has to be the pitch class of A. This has to be the pitch class of B flat. We cannot have them being, an A and an A sharp. They will not fit together on staff, as you can see here. Okay, now if that explanation was a little bit too much, if you didn't quite pick that up, let's understand something else. Well, when I look over here, what I notice is that I have two different kinds of A. I have no B, and then a C. So I notice that I have two A's skipping over a B, and they go directly to C. And just from a strictly logical perspective, that broke our first rule. That broke our first rule where we said we had to write out the skeleton. The skeleton in this second example is F, G, A, C, D, E, F. And you can see that is an absolute disaster. That doesn't even make sense from just a strictly logical perspective. And so that's why the way that we build the F major scale, we're not going to do these other methods. We're not going to do any of these. What we are going to do every single time for building something like the F major scale is we're going to do this. In future videos, we're going to continue to look at more examples of how to build a major scale.